Everyone called 14-year-old Ben Carter a grave robber when he dug a trench through the Red Hollow Cemetery. They called him a thief when the church bell rope disappeared that same night. 3 days later, a river came down from mountains that had been dry for 7 years. Ben's trench became the only path carrying that river away from the sleeping town. But first, he had to open a buried gate that had already killed his father. Red Hollow stood beneath a wall of red cliffs in the Arizona Territory. The summer of 1889 had burned every pasture within 30 miles. Wells tasted of mud, cattle ribs showed through their hides, and arguments began before breakfast. Only Gideon Voss still had green grass behind his fences. His private reservoir, Cedar Basin, held the last dependable water in the valley. Gideon was a tall man with a silver mustache, a black vest, and a polished walking cane. He owned the bank, the largest ranch, and nearly every unpaid debt in town. Ben owned an oversized brown coat, a faded red scarf, and a brass compass that no longer pointed north. He slept in the loft above Ruth Mercer's livery stable. Ruth was a quiet widow, with a gray shawl and hands made strong by years of lifting saddles. She had given Ben a place to sleep after the town buried his father without a proper service. Amos Carter had inspected dams, bridges, and mine tunnels throughout the territory. 3 years earlier, he was accused of stealing the money meant to repair Cedar Basin. A week after the accusation, Amos and his horse vanished in Mercy Canyon. Gideon's riders found the horse below a cliff, but they never found Amos. Most people decided the dishonest surveyor had died while trying to escape. Ben decided nothing until he saw proof with his own eyes. That made him stubborn, suspicious, and nearly impossible to frighten away. It also made him the easiest boy in Red Hollow to blame. Ben earned meals by repairing harnesses, cleaning stalls, and collecting useful objects others had thrown away. Broken hinges, bent nails, wire, canvas, and cracked wagon wheels filled one corner of the stable. Ruth called it Ben's kingdom of things that deserved another chance. Ben never told her he believed people deserved the same. One August morning, he noticed black ants climbing the stable wall with their eggs. They were moving upward in a steady line toward the roof beams. Before noon, field mice began abandoning holes beside the dry creek. By evening, swallows that usually hunted over town had disappeared toward the eastern ridge. The sky remained blue, and the air remained hot enough to blister paint. Ben carried his father's compass to the creek and watched its damaged needle tremble. It did not point north, but it always trembled near iron. Beneath the cracked creek bed, the needle swung toward something buried in the mud. Ben dug with his hands until he uncovered a rusted survey marker. The marker bore his father's initials and an arrow pointing toward Mercy Canyon. Someone had recently pulled it from the ground and driven it back at a different angle. Fresh hammer marks shone along the rusted metal. Ben followed the false arrow and found a line of newer markers leading toward Red Hollow. They marked a flood path straight through the poorest homes in town. His father's original marks led instead toward the cemetery and an abandoned stone quarry. Ben climbed the tallest cottonwood beside the creek and found old branches packed with black mountain silt. The silt rested 20 feet above the ground. A flood had reached that height before Red Hollow existed. Ben climbed down and told Ruth, "Something is coming from Cedar Basin." Ruth looked at the empty blue sky and asked what made him certain. Ben showed her the ants, the silt, and the freshly moved marker. Ruth believed his fear, but she needed the town to believe his evidence. They carried the marker to Sheriff Elias Ward before sunset. Elias was broad-shouldered, sandy-bearded, and unable to fully close his injured right hand. He had once been Amos Carter's closest friend. Since Amos vanished, Elias had barely spoken Ben's name. Ben placed the marker on his desk and explained the altered floodline. Elias studied the fresh hammer marks longer than he studied Ben. Then he said Cedar Basin was lower than it had been in 20 years. Ben answered, "A dry basin can still break if a storm fills it faster than it drains." Elias warned him not to repeat that claim without stronger proof. The sheriff sounded angry, but Ben saw fear behind the anger. Outside the office, Gideon Voss waited beside his black carriage. His cane rested across both hands as though he had been listening for some time. Gideon examined the marker and smiled without warmth. He said, "Your father used those markers while he was stealing from honest people." Ben replied, "Then you should not be afraid of where they lead." Gideon's smile vanished before he turned toward the sheriff. He reminded Elias that spreading panic could empty the town and ruin every remaining business. Elias ordered Ben to leave Cedar Basin alone. Ben left the marker on the sheriff's desk so Elias could not pretend he had never seen it. That night, rain clouds appeared beyond the eastern mountains. No rain reached Red Hollow, but distant lightning flashed without thunder. Ben climbed into the stable loft and opened the wooden box containing his father's possessions. Inside lay a torn notebook, a folding ruler, and the brass compass. Several pages had been cut from the notebook with a sharp blade. On the final page, Amos had drawn a church bell beside a narrow black circle. Beneath the drawing, he had written, "When the basin speaks, mercy must answer." Mercy was the abandoned silver mine above the cemetery. It had closed after a tunnel collapse, buried 2 workers, and ruined its owner. Ben had always believed the mine ended beneath the northern ridge. His father's drawing suggested it reached Cedar Basin. Before dawn, Ben packed a lantern, rope, chalk, dried meat, and his father's folding ruler. Ruth caught him saddling her old chestnut mare. She tightened the mare's girth and said, "You are not going into that mine alone." Ben argued until Ruth placed one hand on the saddle and waited. He knew that particular silence meant the argument had ended. They reached Mercy Mine as sunrise turned the cliffs the color of hot iron. The main entrance had collapsed, but cool air escaped through cracks between the stones. Ben held a strip of cloth near the opening and watched it pull inward. The mine was breathing. They found a narrow ventilation shaft hidden behind thorn bushes farther up the ridge. Ruth tied a rope around Ben's waist before allowing him to crawl inside. The shaft smelled of stone, rust, and water that had not seen daylight in years. 30 feet inside, Ben found an iron rail running down into darkness. His compass needle snapped toward it and trembled violently. The shaft opened into a chamber containing a rusted ore cart and a wooden winding wheel. A thick iron chain disappeared through a bricked passage in the northern wall. Water dripped steadily between the bricks. Ben touched the wall and felt a faint vibration beneath his palm. Cedar Basin was pressing against the other side. Someone had sealed the emergency spillway inside the mine. Ben measured the chamber and compared it with the drawing in his father's notebook. The black circle represented the winding wheel, not the mine entrance. The church bell represented a rope long enough to reach the buried gate. A sound like distant thunder rolled through the bricks. Ruth pulled Ben backward as muddy water sprayed through a new crack. They escaped the ventilation shaft, just before part of the chamber ceiling collapsed. Outside, Ben looked toward the cloudless town below. He said, "The basin is already filling." Ruth asked how rain could fill it when Red Hollow had received none. Ben pointed east, where the mountains disappeared behind a dark wall of clouds. Rain falling beyond those peaks would enter Cedar Basin hours before anyone in town saw a drop. They returned to find Gideon's foreman waiting outside the stable. Cole Rusk was thick-necked, red-faced, and dressed in a dust-colored coat. He carried the rusted survey marker Ben had left with the sheriff. Cole dropped it at Ben's feet and ordered him to stop frightening Gideon's workers. Ben noticed wet clay packed beneath Cole's boots. That pale clay existed only along the inner bank of Cedar Basin. Ben asked, "How wide is the new crack in the dam?" Cole's hand moved toward his revolver before he remembered he was threatening a boy. He answered, "There is no crack," and walked away too quickly. Ben spent the afternoon studying the ground between the cemetery and the abandoned quarry. His father's original markers followed a shallow natural channel between the graves. If deepened, that channel could carry overflow away from the center of town. The quarry could hold thousands of wagon loads of water before spilling. Ben drove a shovel into the hard ground between 2 rows of headstones. By sunset, 3 townsmen had ordered him to stop. By nightfall, someone had thrown his shovel into the dry creek. The next morning, Ben returned with a mattock and continued digging. Children followed him to watch, then adults followed to complain. Reverend Hale accused Ben of disturbing the peace of the dead. Ben answered, "The dead are already on high ground. I am trying to save the living." The Reverend did not forgive the words, but several children secretly began moving loose stones. Ruth brought water and stood between Ben and anyone who tried to take his tools. Sheriff Elias arrived near noon and ordered the digging stopped. Ben showed him the line leading to the quarry. Elias understood the design immediately, which frightened Ben more than ignorance would have. The sheriff quietly said, "Your father drew the same channel." Ben asked why nobody had built it. Elias looked toward Gideon's ranch and said, "Because your father lost the argument." Before Ben could ask more, Gideon's carriage entered the cemetery. Gideon inspected the trench as though calculating its value. He offered Ben $50 to leave Red Hollow before sundown. It was more money than Ben had ever held. Ben asked why a useless boy was suddenly worth $50. Gideon replied, "Because useless people become dangerous when frightened men begin listening." Ben refused the money. Gideon ordered Elias to arrest him for damaging church property. Elias stared at the half-finished trench and slowly removed his handcuffs. Then thunder sounded from the eastern mountains. Every horse in the cemetery lifted its head at once. Gideon told Elias to finish the arrest. Elias returned the handcuffs to his belt and said the jail roof needed repair. It was a weak excuse, but it was the first time he had openly denied Gideon. Gideon promised that the sheriff would regret choosing a thief's son. Elias answered, "I have regretted my choices for 3 years." Gideon left the cemetery without looking back. Elias waited until the carriage vanished before leading Ben into the empty church. He climbed the bell tower with difficulty because his injured hand could not grip the ladder. Behind a loose board, Elias removed a folded oilskin packet. Amos Carter's name was written across it. Elias admitted that Amos had given him the packet the night before he disappeared. Gideon had threatened to take Elias's home if the sheriff revealed it. Elias had hidden the evidence and told himself he was protecting his family. His wife died the following winter, and the lie remained. Ben opened the packet with hands that refused to stay steady. Inside were the missing notebook pages and a signed order from Gideon Voss. The order commanded workers to brick the Mercy spillway and report the repair money as spent. Amos had refused, so Cole Rusk finished the work in secret. The final page contained a warning, written the night Amos vanished. It read, "Gideon will sacrifice Red Hollow before he sacrifices his reservoir." Ben asked Elias whether his father had died because of those pages. Elias said Amos had ridden toward Mercy Canyon to reopen the spillway. Gideon and Cole had followed him before dawn. Only Gideon and Cole returned. Elias had suspected murder but lacked the courage to challenge the man who owned the town. Ben folded the pages and placed them inside his coat. He did not shout or strike the sheriff. He simply said, "You had 3 years. I have 3 days." Elias lowered his head because the boy had spoken the truth without raising his voice. If stories about forgotten people proving their worth through courage matter to you, subscribe and remain with Ben through the storm. Ben removed the church bell rope that afternoon with the Reverend shouting from below. The rope was thick, weathered, and nearly 100 feet long. It was the only rope in Red Hollow strong enough to move the buried spillway gate. Ben carried it toward Mercy Mine with Ruth and Elias following. Half the town watched them leave and assumed the boy had finally lost his senses. Inside the mine, Ben tied the bell rope to the rusted ore cart. He ran the other end around the wooden winding wheel and toward the bricked passage. The iron chain behind the wall was attached to the gate beneath Cedar Basin. If they could connect the rope to that chain, the ore cart could serve as a counterweight. The collapsed section left only a gap wide enough for Ben's shoulders. Ruth refused to let him crawl through until Ben showed her the dripping cracks. Each drop was becoming a thin stream. Elias tied a safety line around Ben's waist with his uninjured hand. Ben entered the gap, carrying his compass, a hammer, and a loop of wire. Beyond the bricks, cold water covered the floor to his ankles. He followed the trembling compass needle until his fingers found the submerged chain. A sudden surge knocked him against the wall and extinguished his lantern. In darkness, Ben heard stones shifting above his head. Ruth pulled the safety line, but Ben shouted that he had not connected the rope. He wrapped the wire around the chain by touch and twisted it with his father's folding ruler. When Ruth pulled again, Ben allowed the rope to drag him through the narrow opening. He emerged soaked, bleeding from one elbow and still gripping the wire. The bell rope was now connected to the gate chain. Elias pushed the ore cart down the rail, but the gate did not move. Years of mud had sealed it more tightly than any lock. Ben said they would need the cart filled with stone and the rail cleared to the lower chamber. That required tools, lantern oil, and at least 20 willing workers. Red Hollow had the workers, but Gideon still owned their debts. Ben returned to town carrying Amos's signed evidence. He placed the papers on the counter inside the crowded saloon. Elias confessed that he had hidden them for 3 years. The room became silent enough to hear dust scratching across the windows. Gideon entered through the rear door with Cole and 4 ranch hands. He called the papers forgeries created by a desperate boy. Then Cole seized them and dropped them into the stove. Ben lunged forward, but Gideon's men held him while the evidence curled into flame. Elias drew his revolver with his left hand and ordered everyone to step back. Gideon reminded the room that Elias had just confessed to hiding evidence. No territorial judge would trust the sheriff's word without the papers. Gideon announced that Ben had damaged the dam and created the danger himself. Men who had been frightened moments earlier now looked at Ben with suspicion. Cole displayed Ben's shovel, which had been found near a fresh cut in the reservoir bank. Ben recognized the trick, but a lie supported by fear moved faster than truth. Gideon demanded that Elias arrest the boy before he caused a flood. Elias refused, so 2 frightened townsmen seized Ben instead. They locked him inside the grain storehouse while the town council argued. Rain began tapping the roof after midnight. Within minutes, the tapping became a continuous roar. Ben watched water crawl beneath the storehouse door. The first flood had arrived from the hills surrounding town. Cedar Basin still waited farther east, collecting a much larger storm. Ben searched the storehouse and found a broken grain scoop with an iron edge. He used it to remove the hinge pins from the inside of the door. The swollen door fell outward just as Ruth arrived with an axe. She looked at the fallen hinges and said, "I should have known you would leave without help." Ben answered, "You still brought the axe?" They found Elias ringing a handbell through the rain because the church rope was gone. He was ordering families to move toward the schoolhouse on the western rise. Gideon's ranch hands were telling everyone to remain inside and avoid panic. Ben climbed onto a water trough and pointed toward Mercy Canyon. A low rumble rolled beneath the thunder and continued long after the sky became quiet. Windows shook, horses pulled against their reins, and water jars trembled on shelves. Ben shouted, "That is not thunder. The basin wall is moving." This time the town listened. Ruth led women and children toward the schoolhouse with blankets and lanterns. Elias sent riders to the isolated farms along the creek. Ben gathered miners, stable hands, and anyone who could swing a pick. He divided them between the cemetery trench and Mercy Mine. Reverend Hale stared at the water rising around the graves. Then he lifted a shovel and began widening Ben's channel. Men who had mocked the trench worked beside children who had secretly carried stones. They lined the channel with fence boards, canvas, and doors removed from empty sheds. At the quarry entrance, Ben built a crude gate from 2 wagon wheels and a stable beam. The gate would direct the first surge into the deepest part of the quarry. Ruth noticed blood soaking through the sleeve around Ben's injured elbow. She tied his red scarf around the wound without asking permission. Ben started toward Mercy Mine. but Ruth caught his coat. She said, "Saving everyone does not require losing you." Ben answered, "The gate will not open for anyone who does not know the chain." Ruth released his coat and followed him into the rain. Inside Mercy Mine, workers loaded the ore cart with broken stone. Elias cleared mud from the rail using one hand and his shoulder. Ben checked the bell rope and found 3 strands freshly cut. Someone had entered the mine after them. Gideon stepped from the lower chamber with Cole beside him. Gideon aimed a revolver and ordered everyone away from the cart. He claimed opening the spillway would empty Cedar Basin and destroy every ranch depending on it. Ben said the basin would break whether the gate opened or not. Gideon answered that a smaller flood might spare his cattle even if it destroyed Red Hollow. For the first time, his frightened workers understood what their loyalty was worth. Cole lowered his revolver, but Gideon struck him across the face with the cane. Elias moved between Gideon and Ben. Gideon fired, and the bullet shattered the lantern above Elias. Darkness covered the chamber as men scattered behind stone supports. Ben crawled beneath the ore cart while another shot struck the wall. He reached the brake lever and released it. The stone-filled cart began rolling down the sloping rail. The bell rope tightened, lifted from the ground, and caught Gideon's cane. Gideon fell as the cane spun into the darkness. The cart gathered speed, pulling against the buried gate with the weight of half a mountain. The weakened rope stretched until the cut strands began snapping. Ben wrapped the loose end around the wooden winding wheel. He drove an iron bar through the spokes to keep the rope from slipping. The bar bent, the wheel cracked, and the rope held. Beneath their feet, the buried gate groaned for the first time in 3 years. Mud burst through the bricks and knocked Ben into the flooded chamber. Ruth caught the back of his coat before the current pulled him through the narrow gap. Elias and Cole dragged both of them onto the higher platform. The gate opened another inch, then stopped against years of hardened silt. The ore cart had reached the bottom of the rail and could pull no farther. Ben remembered his father's folding ruler and the measurements inside the notebook. The lower chamber stood directly beneath the cemetery channel. He ordered the workers to break the weakened ceiling above the gate. Gideon shouted that collapsing the chamber would bury them all. Ben answered, "Only if we remain here." Picks struck stone while water rose around their knees. A crack opened overhead, releasing rainwater from the cemetery trench into the chamber. The falling water softened the silt packed around the spillway gate. Ben kicked the brake free, and the ore cart rolled another few feet. The gate tore open with a roar that extinguished every remaining lantern. Cedar Basin rushed through Mercy Mine and into the channel Ben had dug between the graves. The workers climbed the ventilation shaft as the lower chambers vanished beneath black water. Ben emerged last, still holding the end of the church bell rope. From the ridge, they watched the Spillway River race toward Red Hollow. The cemetery trench caught the water and carried it around the first row of houses. At the quarry, Ben's wagon wheel gate shook but remained upright. The first surge entered the quarry and began filling the enormous stone hollow. Then a deeper sound came from Cedar Basin, like the earth splitting open. The damaged reservoir wall collapsed behind the water already escaping through Mercy Mine. A second wave entered the spillway, larger than the channel had been built to carry. Water climbed over the cemetery banks and tore loose several fence boards. Ben ran toward the quarry gate while the adults shouted for him to stay back. A fallen cottonwood had lodged across the channel and was forcing water toward town. Ben tied the remaining bell rope around the tree and looped it through the wagon wheel gate. Dozens of townspeople took the rope and pulled together. The cottonwood shifted, turned with the current, and slid into the deepest part of the quarry. The blocked channel opened just as the second wave reached the cemetery. Water thundered past the graves and disappeared into the stone quarry. Red Hollow shook beneath the flood, but its homes remained standing. The schoolhouse lanterns burned above the water like a row of small stars. Near the quarry, Gideon tried to escape in his carriage with a locked strongbox. The road collapsed beneath the horses, tipping the carriage into the flooded ditch. Gideon clung to the roof while the strongbox remained chained inside. Elias shouted that the box might contain the records proving Amos's innocence. Ben could reach Gideon or the strongbox, but the current allowed no time for both. He threw the bell rope to the man who had destroyed his father. Gideon caught it as the carriage rolled and vanished beneath the muddy water. The strongbox disappeared with the carriage. Ben, Ruth, Elias, and Cole pulled Gideon onto solid ground. Gideon stared at Ben and asked why the boy had saved him. Ben answered, "Because I am not asking you to prove what kind of man I am." Gideon lowered his eyes as Elias placed him under arrest. Cole agreed to testify about the sealed spillway and Amos's final ride into Mercy Canyon. He also led Elias to a shallow grave hidden beneath the collapsed northern trail. Amos Carter was finally brought home and buried above the channel he had designed. The town placed his name on a stone without the word thief beneath it. Gideon's ranches were sold to repay the families whose homes and cattle had been endangered. Elias resigned as sheriff before the territorial court could decide his punishment. He remained in Red Hollow and spent the next year rebuilding what his silence had nearly destroyed. Ruth never asked Ben whether he planned to remain in her stable loft. She simply built a proper room beside her own and placed his father's compass on the desk. Ben repaired the compass, but he kept the scarred brass case exactly as Amos had carried it. The church received a new rope before winter. Reverend Hale allowed Ben to hang the old muddy piece above the church door. Beneath it, the Reverend placed a small wooden sign reading, "What we feared saved us." The cemetery channel became a permanent stone spillway leading into the quarry. People stopped calling it Carter's Folly and began calling it Ben's River. Ben disliked the name, but Ruth told him towns often needed time to learn humility. The following spring, water from Cedar Basin was divided among every farm in the valley. Ben designed the measuring gates, and Elias built them with his one strong hand. Survival on the frontier rarely belonged to the strongest person in the room. It often belonged to the person who noticed what everyone else had decided to ignore. Ben saw ants climbing, birds leaving, iron moved, and mud where mud should not have been. None of those signs could save a town alone. They became powerful because he connected them, prepared early, and continued working while people laughed. Preparation often looks foolish when danger is still beyond the horizon. A trench seems pointless before the flood, and stored wood seems excessive before the winter. The value of careful work is usually revealed after the moment for easy choices has passed. Ben also proved that character is not measured by how we treat those who deserve our kindness. It is measured by the choice we make when saving an enemy costs us something precious. He lost the strongbox that might have cleared his father's name more easily. By saving Gideon, he preserved the one thing no document could restore after it was lost. He preserved the kind of man his father had taught him to become. Intelligence gave Ben a plan, but mercy prevented the plan from changing him into the people he opposed. In difficult moments, notice the quiet evidence. Prepare before panic begins, and remember what your choices are shaping inside you. Do you believe Ben was right to save Gideon instead of the strongbox containing evidence about his father? Share your answer in the comments, and like the story if Ben's choice stayed with you. Subscribe for another journey about the forgotten people whose courage changed the frontier.